to the next item, which is the discussion on how to tackle road crime with Andy. So Andy, would you like to introduce yourself and explain what you've been doing over the last number of years? I know that you've made a lot of headlines and moved a lot of things forward, for which we are extremely grateful. So thank you very much for what you're going to tell us, and I hope that we'll all be able to join in the discussion too. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you very much, Pauline, and thank you ever so much for inviting me. I should say from the outset as well, thank you to you for all you do now. I know you're going through a bit of a challenging time right now, but I think in terms of, you know, an advocate and something that's changed, and reduced road danger, then, you know, you inspire us all. So I just wanted to personally thank you, and thank you obviously for what you do, but also thank you for the invite. And I'm really, really pleased to be here. You know, no problem. So just perhaps if I do an introduction and then sort of run through a few of the issues as I see them, and then really, really happy to stay for as long as you want to discuss and answer questions or talk about, you know, particular views and so on. But a bit about me. So I joined policing in 1999. I joined because I kind of fell into policing, I suppose, and I really wanted to fight crime, to be frank. And I had this very much an ambition to be somebody that investigated murder. So I worked and achieved that sort of goal fairly early on. And then at some point in 2012, there's been somebody who'd never worked in road policing teams, had never, this is a confession I've got to make, I probably shouldn't make it because it's been recorded, I've never personally issued a traffic ticket. But then I fell into the superintendent job in 2012 when my then chief in Northamptonshire said, "Congratulations, Andy, you're promoted and you're going to work in roads policing." And I was pretty surprised. I was like, I've never, you know, sort of worked in that environment before. I've not really got an understanding of it, etc., etc. But he said, "You're going to really enjoy it. You're going to change it." And he was absolutely right. So I worked in Northamptonshire for a year on that portfolio before moving on. But I'd always wanted to go back. So when I landed in the Met, I very much asked them, I want that portfolio. I want it for as long as you can give it to me. So I worked as the lead for Vision Zero in London for about 3 years, and for fatal collision investigation as well. I'm now in Lincolnshire, as you know, for chief super there, but I'm very much involved in the road policing. I'm seeing, whilst I'm head of crime, I'm very much sort of national fatal collision investigation, influence all around that. And everybody knows my social media, knows my passion is around, you know, sort of tackling road danger, and really, you know, raising its profile, and changing what we all recognise needs to change. You know, I think society, if I start high, so start with society, I think it has this view that road deaths are inevitable. And obviously we need to change that and explain, you know, those 5 people every single day that died, 60 people that are seriously injured every single day in the UK. It doesn't have to be that way. There's much we can do. And from a policing perspective, we obviously one part of that, but we can play a big role in terms of both what we do, but also influencing everybody else and all the agencies and stakeholders involved. When I first, it's the same in Northamptonshire in fairness, but if I talk specifically about my experience in the Met, I'd say the culture I walked into in terms of policing culture was quite complacent. It was essentially doing what it always done, and didn't really have, in my opinion, a very, you know, a clear strategy for what it was about. And we had high numbers of enforcements, but I wanted it to be intelligence led. So to that end, I wasn't interested in, for example, how many tickets we'd issued or what we'd, you know, how many people we'd prosecuted or anything like that. It was almost being intelligence led, and therefore identifying the most dangerous roads, the most dangerous drivers, and the most dangerous issues. So for instance, and I think this is the case nationally in many regards, there's a range of things roads policing officers do and enforce, but actually when you get data based and you identify what the core and the biggest risk to life is on our roads, you move into very specific themes. Now I'm sure everybody's heard of the Fatal 4, but I really wanted to hone that in and be far more targeted around it. And the research that I commissioned in London showed speeding as by far the biggest cause of fatal collisions. And in London, which I think may bear similar notes around the country, it's 20 and 30 mile an hour roads that are the most prevalent for fatal and serious collisions. So the 20 mile an hour issue, for example, in London, where we have our vulnerable road users, our cyclists, and obviously our pedestrians, really the policing culture hadn't necessarily bought into enforcing in those zones. But of course, being intelligence led, I wanted to put people where they needed to be, when they needed to be there, targeting who they need to target and the issue they need to target, and basically set a core strategy of, yeah, we're there to protect life, we're there to tackle crime, and we're there to support basically the public, rather than we're there to enforce. It doesn't really matter what we enforce, and we go about doing what we've always done in the past. So it was a bit of a change in strategy, and really mile an hour roads in London surged, enforcement and speeding surged. We targeted specific roads as well. So rather than the 9,000 roads across London, we narrowed that down analytically. It still meant we were there if you needed us, and we were there doing not just the roads I'm about to talk through, but we spent a lot of time enforcing on specific roads. So our data showed out the 9,000, 132 roads in London had a really dramatic percentage ratio of the fatal and serious injuries. So we targeted them with an over and above strategy. That wasn't just policing. We tried to get our partners into it. We looked at the infrastructure. We looked at everything for those roads, but we made sure we were there enforcing the right thing in the right way. And for example, roads like the A10 and the A12, which if you followed my social media at the time, you'd have probably got bored of seeing me tweet about them, but they were roads that we really, really targeted and communicated as well. So, and part of all this, I think, has been, I said at the start, society didn't have this inevitability view. We need to educate and inform basically the public. Likewise, our internal audience within policing as well. So we need to educate the officers so they understand that what the difference they can make. But I sort of did both at the same time. And I think perhaps, as I've always referred to it as road crime. For too long, we've heard things like traffic offences and things like that. So I very much refer to road crime, and we needed to educate the public really, and policing itself around this is crime, it's law breaking, and it's really dangerous. And I always start many a presentation like this. I didn't today, perhaps I should have done, but by saying, the profile we should try and attach to it in policing is that, road death unfortunately will kill more by twice as many more than die through murder or terrorism in the UK every year so far. And it's more than that. So, we need to therefore resource it. We need to focus on it. We need to call it as it should be termed, and we need to target it with, the same determination that policing is always about. Policing is supposed to be about protecting people, and therefore I always talk about this is about saving life, and you have to therefore educate the public to that extent. So the communication strategy I very much deployed was around how do we influence behaviour and understanding. So I think far too often we have an attitude within the public and drivers at large is that it's okay for me to speed, it's okay for me to pick my phone up, or it's okay for me to do that dodgy overtake or not to wear my seatbelt, etc. And we have to call that out. So I very much called it out by giving the ratios of those people that take that risk, the likelihood that they would increase the chances of being a fatal serious injury collision, that it's really so moving that on. I said very early on, the police are a small part in this really, but they can influence. So I moved to that strategy of encouraging the public to report road crime. Now, a couple of bright sparks many years ago before myself, so this isn't my initiative, but I think I've made a big difference in terms of pushing it nationally and making it more aware, came up the idea of reporting data.
I do know what it's like. I know what it is.
Resource, and we can't be everywhere all the time, but the public can. And I think a large part is how we deter dangerous and reckless driving. So by encouraging the public to use dash cam or head cam, or if you're on a horse, helmet cam, whatever it may be, any electronic footage and reporting it to us means there's eyes on driving everywhere and every minute of the day, and on every road that there happens to be somebody else driving or somebody else present. And I think trying to get into the mindset of the dangerous driver, they perhaps look for the speed camera or they looked for the police officer. But when you know that anybody can enforce, I think it will have an impact and will lead to more sensible and safe driving. So in London, when I first asked, and this is, I think, at about the start of 2018, I asked, okay, so how did the public tell us about dangerous driving? And there was a meeting, a group meeting, and somebody suggested to me that there's a link on the website. I go, okay, what have we done to market that? And the response came back, words to the effect of, but that's going to create extra work. And I had to therefore change that culture and say, that's totally misguided. It's about actually reducing, killed and serious injury collisions. It's about protecting life. And again, it goes to this, and it's not just police, and this is everybody, I think. You need to educate and change that culture to make people realize that you can change behavior here and you can really make a difference around the whole devastation that's caused on the roads. And so during that meeting, and I had this debate around, well, we're going to make it really obvious, we're going to make it really prominent on our website, which we did. We're going to make the meeting, and then I kept tweeting it, and people like Jeremy Vine tweeted it, and other media, and then even the Standard covered it, and then the Times covered it, and our numbers absolutely surged in terms of referrals. And now nationally, we've got national consistent guidance out there now to make this not a postcode lottery for where it occurs, to give everybody the opportunity to be part of the solution, because it is about everybody stepping up. So everybody on the line, I'd really encourage you to get a dash cam in your car if you can, and take part in that. Then it'll be widespread, and we'll get widespread coverage, and we'll have an impact, and less people will suffer on our roads because of dangerous and reckless driving. So coming back to sort of targeting the most dangerous roads, drivers and themes. So being very much data-based, an example of what we did, we managed to get around about 500 people in London identified through their driving history or through their sort of link to both driving behaviour and other forms of criminality, and then targeted them through a road crime team we created, and that sort of ruthlessly went after these drivers, and I think set a really, really strong example, and enforced a load of dangerous driving offences, but also found other things like, this is London, so it's not necessarily born. Is doing both things, protecting life on the road and also tackling other forms of crime as well. And then themes, I mentioned speeding. And speeding really is the big thing here, in my opinion. So my experience, the data that DFT published doesn't necessarily back this up yet, but there's perhaps work we need to do around the data collection process there. But speeding is absolutely the significant issue. So therefore, things like community speed it's my personal opinion. Pleased to see Wales are pursuing that. I'm pleased to hear Scotland are looking at as well. And I think London has certainly expanded the 20-mile-an-hour zones, which I think is a positive. But that is a personal opinion. I think there's some research to do there. But I saw only today Brussels announced or gave some data that looked positive since introducing the 20-mile-an-hour zones in their area. Because I think that protects vulnerable road users. And I think for too long, for example, the cyclists in particular struggled with some of the culture of driving, have struggled with poor infrastructure. And I think this is a game where headcam has a big part to play, because they can therefore take some action against the drivers.
think you've frozen, Andy. I'm not sure if there's anything we can do about this.
For road crashes, I basically, have a huge respect for RoadPeace. I'm fortunate myself to never been personally touched by a road crash. But obviously, when you see what happens, you see the devastation, see the whole impact, and knowing that it can happen to anybody. And I always say I haven't been touched yet, because we never obviously know, and yourselves know obviously better than anybody. You never know when that may happen. So I always say, we need to do more. So hence I did the challenge for RoadPeace, and real grateful for everybody who helped share that and market that. And that raised 53,000. I think was the last count. Although I have seen a couple of sponsors still coming in, even though it finished months ago. But I wanted to sort of say here today, I'm doing a challenge next year as well. So it is going to be the same week. We've got a new chief constable who's coming, who leads road policing nationally, Joe Shiner. I have to say, really progressive thinker, very communicative, perhaps different to what we've had in the past. So I think really in a positive way. She wants to support the challenge, and I think wants to get involved as well. So we're hoping that every force in the country gets involved. I've got interest from America in potentially running over there. There's all sorts of things that we're doing, but we're hoping the target's going to be set up, raising $500,000 for RoadPeace. So I really hope that can be as successful as we wish. But the main thing I think the challenge tried to do is get media attention on it. So, and we did get a lot of coverage, across that whole week. And I think that, I obviously put out a call to action at the end of the run, which was basically to a number of people to step up really around this. And some of the things I called for were to obviously end referring to it as an accident and referring to road collision or crash, preferably collision, in my opinion. I think we need to, because I know even legislation refers to them as accidents. And I've recently published a book where I had to use the word accident, and it really annoyed me because, that infers non-blame. And I think therefore, not at least 90% of road crashes have a blame element to it. So I think we need to move away from that. I think manufacturers need to really have a look at the way they market their cars, and why cars, for example, I'm going to pick on the car for a while, but why can cars go at such extreme speeds? So I recently saw one from Tesla that could do 140 mile an hour from 0 to 148 seconds. And I just can't understand why we would allow that, frankly, onto the roads. So manufacturers, I think, have got a role to play, and I asked for them in the call to action to speak more safety rather than capability. Legislation, exceptional hardship. Now, I know there has been some progress around exceptional hardship, but I think the fact that legislation still exists is just unacceptable, really, where people, obviously that means where people who have got 12 points or more continue to keep their license because they say the impact to them financially is so severe. But I think they've had 4 chances already to learn the lesson. And what about the impact to bereaved families? And should put bereaved families first and other road users first ahead of that individual who's already had multiple chances. So I'd like exceptional hardship to end. Things like speed. So legislation currently, you can be an extreme speeder, but if you're not an extreme speeder and dangerous per se, now that's a legal technicality, because you have to have done more than just speed to show that you're dangerous for us to charge dangerous driving, and that really limits the sentencing powers. So I think there's something for legislation around that to change, which obviously I asked for. I think the whole sentencing of road crime is inconsistent and broadly very lenient. I don't think, and people know the analogy I probably have used before, if you stop somebody with a knife in the street before use, and you stop an extreme speeder, let's say going at 150 mile an hour before they've crashed, we both would recognise the potential devastation those people could cause if they used the knife or crashed is immense. Yet the sentencing tends to be much more severe for the person carrying the knife rather than the person doing 150 mile an hour. So I think we need to start to look at the risk and the impact more than just, I think that goes to societal understanding around how risky speeding is, or, and everything that goes with it, and the whole causes of road crime and the impact of road crime. I think we should use technology far more than we do. So speed limiters, potential things to curtail, drink drivers, potential things to help influence good behaviour, like black box could be widespread, dash cam could be widespread. So I think there's a need to really go after technology. Insurers could incentivise some of that as well, which would have a double benefit in terms of encouraging safe and sensible driving. But fundamentally for me, it's around culture. So if I had a magic wand, I'd probably create something like a road safety commissioner that could oversee every agency and really connect everybody, because I think we've got a huge amount of stakeholders involved in road safety and road danger at large. But how often are we connecting? I think Joe Shine, who's coming, is going to be fantastic at that, I have to say. But I think, we need to do much more, I think, collectively. There's so many agencies that have a role, and we should put safety at the heart of that rather than other things. So primarily, really around culture, and that might lead to, for example, investment, resourcing, etc., that comes with it. I've probably stolen too much of your time at that point, so I'll perhaps just pause there and see if anybody has anything to come back on.
Right, who would like to start? Don't be shy. Right, David?
Just to say, I couldn't agree more with everything that Andy has said, and to thank him so much for everything he's done so far and everything that he's obviously continuing to do. And I'm sure if we can get all this to happen eventually, and I know it will take time and a lot of hard work, but it will ultimately make a difference. So thanks very much, Andy, for all that you're doing.
Thank you very much, David. I really appreciate that feedback. Thanks so much.
Pauline, can I ask a question? Andy, Stuart Mclver from Merseyside Police. Welcome. Hello again. Just a quick question in regards to, obviously, you're very, very passionate about this. As a Detective Chief Superintendent, you've got massive influence with your own force. As you're probably well aware, roads policing has massively been underinvested in for years and years and years across the whole of the country, across England and Wales. How can we, with road police, yourself, influence all forces? We're trying to invest in it massively, but again, it's trying to get chief officers on board. It's a struggle. You get the feedback that people understand it, but we don't really see massive change. We never see huge investment in it. As you say, people are more likely to be killed on the roads than they are with murder and terrorism, yet we massively investigate in the crime world. We massively invest within it. We don't within the roads policing world. How can we do that? Because the only way we're going to improve is by investing heavily in roads policing.
Have I got you back?
Oh, yeah, you're there. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I got the gist, I think. Sorry, my line's obviously playing up slightly. So sorry for that. But I didn't get your name, sorry, because I was just going to...
Stuart Mclver.
Stuart. Hi, Stuart. So it's a really difficult, isn't it? But I think that's not just policing. So that's what I was trying to say around putting everybody together to try and invest in resourcing and focus for it and priority to it. So one of the things I called in the call to action was for Parliament for, if we look at what happened probably about 6 months ago, I think, when we're looking at the violence against women and girls was very, very prominent in the national debate. Obviously, Sarah Everard case made that very prominent. Jess Phillips, who's a Labour MP, read out the names of every woman and girl that had been murdered in the previous 12 months in Parliament. It got lots happen on the back of it. So I asked for an MP. I called out basically in the Times for MPs for an MP to step forward and do the same for road death. And one actually made contact with me, and she's very, very positive about it, and I think is a real advocate for change around this. But suggested there was too many names to read out, and I said, well, that's exactly the point. So it's how do you create the change to then give it the resource and focus? So I think it just needs this wholesale refocus really. So what I've tried to do for the policing angle is obviously number one to do for roads policing, tackling crime, which is obviously pretty important for policing as well. So you'll protect life, tackle crime, and it's what the public want as well. So for me, it feels it's what we should invest in. There's huge benefits for all manner of things. I mentioned the road crime team, but we had in London what it did in terms of other forms of crime as well. So we've recently had an HMRC review that is starting to influence. We've got a new chief constable who's really keen to influence around this as well. So I think we've got a real opportunity. We've got the roads policing review that's been underway for quite a while, due to report reasonably soon. I think probably realistically early next year. It might be slightly later. But there's lots happening and lots of profile given to it. But the reason I think part of my challenge was successful is because not many people have called that out. Whereas, you know, I've been able to do that, I think, and that's given me probably a platform to try and push even harder, which I'm trying to do. But it's a tough battle. I'm not going to sit here and say we've got it nailed. We absolutely haven't. But I think there is some progression and there is some movement in the right direction around it.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.
I think that your call to action amongst your colleagues is really vital in the success of this campaign. And in Merseyside, in our remembrance yesterday, we were lucky enough to have the Chief Constable speaking and the new Police and Crime Commissioner speaking, as well as the Lord Mayor and some of our own members. And I feel that once they've become involved in a service such as that, they see it in a different way. Because I think in many respects, roads policing has been the poor relation in many police forces. And I think making the senior officers aware, as Stuart said, is vital in getting the resources that are needed in each police force to be able to do the job with the correct tools that they need. So I hope that right throughout the country, senior officers will be able to realise the importance of what we're doing, and this message that there are far more people killed on the roads than by murder and manslaughter. I think that is vital, and it needs to be said again and again, and in as many places as possible. So please keep up the good work, Andy.
Pauline,
Yes.
is that something we can take forward with Emily to talk to the Chief Constable about?
Yes, she does meet with the Chief Constable on regular occasions. I know that when she came to us, to our meeting in July, she was very soon going to have her first meeting with the Chief Constable. And one of the things that she said she was going to do was to see where the Chief Constable was going to be putting the new police that were being allocated to the Merseyside force. And so we do need to follow this up. And if you look through the minutes that were sent with this invitation today, you'll be able to see various challenges that we threw out to her. She was only new in office, and it was very good of her to join us so early in in her tenure. But she's a couple of months ago, before the elections, we had a meeting where we invited all the candidates who were hoping to be the PC to answer questions from us, and she answered the questions well, and there were some questions that we didn't have time to ask on the night. She was the only one of the candidates who responded by email and answered those questions. So I think she's made a good start, and she's shown her commitment, But of course, some of the things that we wanted her and asked her about, such as, can she influence the CPS in the way that they sometimes say to families that it's not in the public interest to prosecute? She has no jurisdiction over the CPS or the courts, but what she did say she would do is to meet with Alison Hernandez, who I'm not sure what her exact title is, but she's responsible for all the PCCs with regards to roads policing. And so she had said that she would speak to her to see if as a body of PCCs, they can do something about this. So I think we have to attack this in lots of different ways and use all the people who might have some influence to bring about change. But I think the more of us that can work together to do this, then the better. And hopefully we'll be able to have more meetings with her, maybe some of us as individuals, but also, you know, she'll always be welcome at our meetings. And I know that some of her officers are very involved in the sort of issues that we have been putting forward.
Definitely so, the conversation, Darren. Thank you.
Oh, all right.
Just a small point. Watching programs like Traffic Cops and Police Interceptors, I've always thought how strongly the fact that roads policing was involved in finding other forms of crime. So obviously if we got more people doing roads policing and picking people up for traffic violations, they will find then the drug dealers and who knows what else in the course of that stop. And you know, to me that seems a good argument for increasing the number of traffic officers on the road.
Andy, you're muted.
Was I muted?
No, Andy's muted.
Sorry, yes. There's a lot of people that want to mute me for a long time.
Not us.
But David, I was just about to say that, you know, so, you know, there's lots and lots of cases I can point to. But for example, probably the most high profile one, Peter Sutcliffe, was found for a traffic stop. And that's how he was identified. So, you know, but you've got cases which I had in London where, you know, people wanted for attempted murder, simple traffic stop. You know, they'd been looking for them for months, but we found them that way. So, you know, like you say, drugs, guns, weapons, you know, counterfeit currency, the stolen vehicle itself, you know, et cetera, et cetera. It's such a proactive opportunity to detect other crime. But, you know, fundamentally, even if you took all that away, there's still a strong enough rationale to police the roads to reduce the danger and protect life that way. So it's very much, you know, strong on both counts.
Yeah, I remember many years ago, I was asked to give a talk to chief police officers, and I'd been invited by some of the traffic police to do that. And I was invited to stay to listen to the other speakers too. And I was amazed at the high percentage of people who were stopped for traffic crimes who were involved in other crimes. And that really stuck in my mind then. And I've heard it being brought forward time and time again. But I'm not sure that all the police officers understand that. So maybe it's something that needs to be done within each force, for that to be reiterated time and time again. And I know that, for example, Paul Mountford has been has had this idea of using the video by Kira Lee to be introduced by one of the ACCs, so that everybody who works in Merseyside Police is shown that video, so that they realise the impact of road death on a family. So, Paul, do you know exactly when that is going to be brought to fruition?
No, I don't, Pauline. In fact, it was only yesterday that I actually looked on our website, if you like, our internal website, and couldn't find it anywhere. So I've chased up the media team to see where it's up to, because I know the ACC has produced the introduction for it, and I just need to make sure that they've actually got that going forward, if you like, because I'm really keen that every police officer, not just road policing, but every officer knows that the impact of road death and what they can do to prevent it. So, I'll certainly let you know when I know it's been done. So,
thank you. And if it isn't done quickly, then maybe we need to bring it to the attention of the Chief Constable, because she introduced that very video.
It'd be very timely to do it.
And I'm sure she would be very cross if she thought that it wasn't going to be done.
Well, bear in mind, I first mooted the idea last September, so we're 12 months along, and I'm still pushing against this this door. But we'll get there. We'll get there, you know. Yeah.
And Andy Cox, can you understand what the resistance is to other policing departments against road crime?
No, I think I fundamentally think it's a culture thing for society, and they haven't quite got the same understanding. Because, like I say, if I looked at sentencing, if I look at the amount of law breaking, so we recently had some data published, I think, from DFT, and they showed, for example, in a 30-mile-an-hour zone, more than 1 in 2 were speeding. So, you know, I think, and that was data that was just checking the speeds of all vehicles going through for a long period of time. So I think there's a lack of understanding that's out there across everybody in terms of what causes fatal collisions. There is that culture around people think it's inevitable. And of course, we know they can be prevented. Policing obviously has a significant part to play in it, but then you could look at infrastructure, you could look at legislation, you can look at, you know, what manufacturers and insurers are doing. So I think it's very much a collective effort. I do genuinely think there is a much greater buy-in. So, for example, just even getting across the country now the ability to report road crime and it being treated as a crime rather than we don't do that, we don't accept that, you know, is a real step forward, because that has to be resourced. We have to prosecute that and other things. We are using different forms of technology. I used a drone myself. Others have used similar things to help enforce some stuff. So there is pockets of really strong work out there. There is, I think, a broad positive movement towards where we need to get to, and there are things like the road policing review, which is ongoing at the moment. But there's a huge amount further to go as well. So, but that's why probably people like myself, and obviously everybody here, and I know others online from who are real strong advocates across all manner of sort of parties involved. We all just need to keep pushing, really, because I think we have made a lot of progress and there is a lot of change, and I'm really confident with new leadership where policing will go in the next 4 or 5 years, but there is a long way to go as well.
Pauline, can I just ask a quick question?
Of course.
Andy, it sounds like you've got plenty of challenges there, but the one that jumps out at me as possibly being the toughest is the responsibility of car manufacturers. And just following on, I suppose, from what you've just said there, what can you do and what can we do as road safety campaigners and the wider public, really, to put pressure on manufacturers to prioritise safety over performance and speed? He's either thinking very carefully about that or he's frozen.
I think he's frozen.
I think he's frozen. Oh, poor Andy. Oh, this is annoying, isn't it? Yeah. Does anybody else have any ideas for what Steve has just asked? Have we lost him?
I've got myself back. I hope that you can. It keeps dropping out, but I can you hear me all right now?
Yes.
Yes. Sorry about that. I got the gist. I think that the question was, before it cut out, the biggest challenge is manufacturers and how we influence sort of their thing. I've gone on a funny angle possibly here as well, so apologies if I have. We are trying to do that. So through the road policing review, we have got, for example, into all forms of manufacturers. We are trying to talk about speed limiters. We are looking at things like electric vehicles as well, and how we might you know, influence legislation around them. But of course, being brutally honest, the really big influencers or people we need to influence here are Department for Transport, because ultimately they can govern and legislate and set almost the parameters for how vehicles ultimately come onto our road. And what the capability of them is, what the legislation is, you know, etc. So what insurance requirements there are. Policing tries to influence that. So, for example, I was in a meeting recently with DFT where things were discussed, but you know, ultimately we have to work within the framework and the law that they give us. So I think, you know, personally speaking, I would advocate, you know, if you've got a view, a passion around this, speak to your MP, speak to the DFT, take part in consultations, continue through RoadPeace to speak loudly. Obviously, you've got Vicky, the Bracky sort of does the comms piece for that, and I think does that really, really effectively. It's about influencing the right people, I think, and making you know, your voice heard through that, which ultimately what the challenge and the call to action was about, to try and get it heard. And it was a real challenge, to be frank. But you know, the more we do that, and the more loudly I think the voice gets, really. So there isn't, you know, policing will operate with whatever we get at the back end, but we do try and influence, you know. So, for example, changing vehicle design or vehicle capability is not something that happens overnight, which is obviously your point. You know, we have to have that voice now. So 3, 4, 5 years down the line, the vehicles come out looking a bit different.
David?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Interesting, because Andy mentioned speed limiters a couple of times. I don't think he's talking about the sort of speed limiter that I've got on the car, but I do actively use a speed limiter on the car when I'm driving, whether it be anything from 20 miles an hour to 70 miles an hour, whatever the limit is. All I've got to do is click the button and the car just will not go any faster than that. All I've got to do is just keep gentle pressure on the accelerator, and I know that I can control the speed, and at no point will it go beyond the speed limit, and it makes driving so much easier. It's not the same as, I've got cruise control, which I don't use because I don't enjoy cruise control, but the speed limiter actually means I can control the speed at lower speeds, but I know that I'm not going to be breaking the speed limit at any point. The other thing about vehicles, what annoys me is, and it's been so for so many years now, is that TV adverts for cars seem to be sold simply on the technology of the car, not on how safe the car might be, but you know what you can do with it in terms of playing your videos or your CDs or whatever you might be wanting to do, instead of saying, well, you should be keeping your mind on driving. I won't even switch the radio on when I'm driving. It just, you know, as far as I'm concerned, I want to listen to the car, I want to listen to the road noise, I want to listen to the engine, and I want to listen to whatever might be going on outside the car. So technology, for me, that kind of technology doesn't do it. The speed limiter, however, I do find is a very useful piece of technology that I've got on my car at the moment.
Thank you, David. Any more questions?
Hi.
Sharron?
Hello. Can I just ask Andy, of course, Pauline knows I campaigned for a graduated driving licence because of the circumstances that my 18-year-old daughter Caitlin was killed in. The crash was put down to inexperience of the driver because she just passed a test. And I just wondered what you thought about graduated driving licence, and is there anything that the police can do or you can suggest to me that you may be able to help with my campaigning, because the government just aren't listening. Even though we know that one of the leading causes of death for the age group of 17 to 25-year-olds is road crashes, they're still refusing to put safety precautions in place. And the main thing I'm wanting is that newly qualified drivers can't carry their friends as passengers for a limited amount of time after they've passed the test. And I just wondered if you agree with me. And well, of course, I feel very strongly about that because that's how my daughter was killed. but I just wondered if you could advise me on what the police think about it and if you could help me in some way.
Yeah, thank you. My line keeps breaking up, so I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, I
If you
can hear you.
You can, yeah. So
Yeah.
I caught some of that, and you know, I know of your case, to be fair, because I saw it through Edmund King.
Edmund King.
Yeah, and the you know, sort of campaigning around that. So
yeah,
you know, I think you've got real strong campaign there. So graduated licenses, my gut feeling is that's a sensible way forward, because you know, I think we do need to look at that sort of age range where people can on occasion, you know, through peer pressure and through other things, driving a certain way. So I think there's a really, really strong case for that. I'm really happy to connect offline and talk that through when signal's not so bad as it is now.
yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, I know there is a lot of work around that, and there is some discussions around that, and obviously having the likes of Edmund, you know, sort of, you know, advocate that as well. I think it's got to have a strong, you know, opportunity to influence.
Yeah.
So if you connect with Pauline with your sort of email details and just drop me a line, because Pauline's got my email address, then
Right.
I'll got you when we've got probably more opportunity to talk it through. But
Yeah.
my
Thank you.
yeah, my impression is, and I need to probably do a bit of research around it, but it, you know, it makes a lot of sense to have some form of restrictions. Now, I talk about using the black box and all the technology around it to try and influence safe and sensible driving. And I do think for young people, insurers should really market this and incentivize it. Vehicles should have more technology design that prevents certain driving behaviours. And of course, there's lots more education to do, really. I mean, on a personal level, I sometimes think, you know, the drive, it's a huge responsibility to give people at such a young age as well. So, you know, I think there is stuff, but I'd really want to understand that. So it's probably easier for me to talk it through with you offline, I think.
Okay. Thanks for that, Andy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Pauline.
Thank you for all that you're doing. I do know that in America, in some states, young drivers are not allowed to carry passengers. And I know when my eldest son, the one who died, learned to drive, we didn't allow him to take friends in the car until he'd been driving for almost a year, because we wanted him to get, you know, really used to the feel of the road before he had them with him. So I think it just makes common sense. And I thought it was so disappointing when that suggestion was turned down. But you know, we need to try and encourage our MPs and our councillors, because this is the way we're going to change things. They are the ones that make the law, and we've all got a responsibility to make sure that our MPs understand this.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And for things that happen locally, obviously it's the local councillors who can change things too. So, you know, we've got to become politically aware, as well as, you know, making other, you know, everyday public people aware.
Yeah.
But thank you for all that you've been doing.
Oh,
David?
thanks, Pauline.
There is a lot of evidence in different parts of the world that GDL, graduated driving licenses, do work. But I always hark back to when I was an ADI. The people who would want to do Pass Plus after they passed their driving test were the ones who didn't really need to do it, because they were the sensible, responsible drivers, and the ones who didn't do Pass Plus were the ones who should have done it, because they actually needed to take on board a bit more of their responsibility once they passed the test and got out there. But what is happening to some degree on Merseyside and in other parts of the country, thankfully as well, is the Engage scheme, where we've got ADIs who are going beyond just simply teaching people how to drive and pass the test, or to pass the test. Problem we've got at the moment is since COVID, there's been obviously driving lessons couldn't take place. Theory tests even couldn't take place. We've now got a situation where ADIs are back on the road with their pupils. But unfortunately, we've also got a shortage of driving examiners. There is recruitment going on with the DVSA to get more examiners, but they've got a particular problem at the moment with motorcycle examiners. But just with drivers, it's not easy to get the young drivers back on the road, and therefore it's going to probably be even harder to get them to the sort of quality that we would want them to be before they go for their driving test. Never mind training them for what the DVSA is always saying they're wanting is safe driving for life. So there are some worries and some issues around that at the moment, but certainly GDL appears to work in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
We've been on to Parliament and MPs over the country many times. It's been looked at. It just hasn't happened yet. So perhaps with a bit more battering of the MPs, we might get somewhere with that.
Fingers crossed.
I'm just wondering whether or not a standard letter to local, want to be drafted to be sent to the sixth form schools for the parents, because I know obviously there's a lot of parents that absolutely dread the prospect of their child learning to drive, going on the road, and then going with friends. But maybe a standard letter to your local MP that's then circulated via sixth form colleges or whatever. I think there'd be a lot of parents who would, would engage with that and would send it to their local MP. I do think that's probably something worth thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah, because it does seem to be a fear for parents when your children get to that age, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think more than the children, to be honest. And they'd have more inclination to send a letter to their MP, particularly if it was already drafted and all you had to do was effectively put in the name of your MP. I know they'll all look the same, but it would show, that potentially, it wins votes, sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's something that every parent worries about. Even when you have an adult child and they're in their 30s and 40s, you still worry about them and want to know when they've got home. And that fear never goes away, especially when you've been through something like this. So well, thank you for that, Alison.
Yeah, thanks.
Maybe we should trial it in Neston.
Paul and I have done work in various schools, round and about. And it's not a bad idea to actually push that out just beyond the school itself to the parents. And don't see any harm in trying that out at all. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions for Andy? Can I ask you, Andy?
Yeah, sure.
When you were trying to introduce the idea of Vision Zero in London, you had so many different authorities that you had to deal with. You seemed to be successful in getting them to accept the idea of Vision Zero, which has come up against resistance in lots of areas. What do you think was your secret in getting them to accept it?
So I think Transport for London, to be honest, so Vision Zero has been the mayor's concept for some time. I think it's a concept, isn't it, around major cities in the world. And I think, truthfully, Transport for London, working with them, they've been absolutely fantastic to work with. Really, really strong advocates of it. You've got people like Will Norman, very proactive, deputy mayor, etc. So without trying to get too political in support of them, I think they did a fantastic job. I think my role was really to come in and so I did go and present to the every council or borough council lead, and went to various meetings where I had them all there and was very much advocating, obviously, Vision Zero. But then, in fairness, my job wasn't overly that hard, because I think the vast majority of them, not all, but the vast majority were pro. And therefore, it was just a case really of making sure they understood everything we talked about today in reality. And it was very similar pitch to sort of to say, you know, this is why, this is what we can do, this is how we can make a difference. You know, for example, the LTNs in London, you know, being obviously contentious. Yeah, my public position on it, of my own opinion, not necessarily the police's opinion, is I think they're a good thing. But you know, so that was so interesting that some have adopted and others haven't. But obviously that's all subject to evaluation, and I think that's really part of the key. I think, you know, we probably don't evaluate enough, and therefore have an academic sort of view why this works or it doesn't work. And I think, you know, one of the key things in my perspective, which TfL are really, really good at, is evaluating what they do and coming up with new ideas, looking around the world as what's happening elsewhere, and then trying to feed that through. So if ever I do get back to London, I think I'd, you know, be a very big advocate of TfL on that whole agenda. But I think, you know, it'd be good to see that approach get adopted more widely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that.
No.
And something else I wanted to ask you. How are you finding the trials for e-scooters? Because I know in Liverpool, they are causing havoc in lots of places. There was a study done recently by an orthopedic surgeon who looked at the number of serious injuries that had happened in the 6 months since their introduction. And I think there had been 56 serious injuries in that 6 months. And in the previous 6 months, there had only been 6. But I know I'm not often in Liverpool city centre, but when I have been there, I've seen them, maybe 3 people riding on one scooter. I've seen them going straight through traffic lights on red. I've seen them riding the wrong way up one-way streets. They're riding on the pavements. And it's quite frightening because they just dart out in front of people. And similarly, the e-bikes are causing havoc too. And I do know, even the PCC admitted this, that these are being used for crime in many cases. And yet the trial has been extended in Liverpool, much to the dismay of so many people.
So this is a difficult one for me, to be honest, Pauline.
I'm sorry I'm putting you in a difficult position.
No, it's all right. You've got me right.
I have tried even with the PCC asking you that, and with the Chief Constable.
You saved the best right to the end. So no, but basically, so number one, like I said just now, I think first thing is to properly evaluate it. But there's 2 types. So as you were alluding to, going through the stuff there, the person that's on the pavement, the person that's going through the red light, the person that's free up on the e-scooter, all of that's illegal wherever it is currently.
Yeah.
But I think there is a debate to be said to look at. So like I said, number one is to trial it, which they're doing. Those trials have really tight legal framework around them. So they're not legal, you know, in some parts of the country, they're completely illegal, however you're using it currently. In the trial zones where they can only be used, there's tight constraints. So for example, I think they're 8 mile an hour in London. I think it was 12.5 mile an hour maximum. So obviously on the road, you've got to have a license. You've got to use it under very regulated conditions. It's got GPS tags all over it, so they know where you are. There's design requirements, etc. So there is a very, very strong regulatory framework around the trial and legal use of them. Everything outside that is illegal because it's dangerous and risky. What I would say is if you look at the concept of the e-scooter and then you look at the numbers that we talked about, for example, 5 fatalities and 60 seriously injured every day. Part of the reason for that, I suspect, is because, so I always go back to the biggest cause at the moment, even with e-scooters, and I totally get the other crime point where people are using them for crime, and that's obviously got a challenge for policing in general. But for the other types of crime, but there's still the car. So, you know, if you think of congestion, you think of the speeding car, you think of, you know, if you then look at other stuff, which isn't a policing responsibility, but you look at things like environment and other bits, they're trying to find ways, aren't they? But I think once the trial reports and gives a view, then somebody in Department for Transport will have a look at and think, you know, is this appropriate to deploy them more widespread or not, as the case may be, or do we need to do something different and make them even more so? The bottom line is that the key point is I'm interested in, and I don't know because I haven't been part of it, I've not had a lot to do with it, but legal use of these scooters, what's the risk to them? So if somebody's using it illegally, in the cases that you signed out, clearly they're going to cause, you know, they have the potential to be far more likely to cause a serious injury or worse. But the same in many regards as car usage, isn't it? So there's probably something about, there isn't enough awareness out there, there's not enough education out there. But if ever you got to a position where you could somehow control them, speed limiter, as they, you know, the legal ones are, like with shooting cars, in my opinion, and you made them very safe, and you've got a culture out there that is properly regulated and understood, then maybe that would restrict the amount of other issues that we suffer through the, you know, for the other vehicles out on the road. So, so basically, I'm trying to say, it needs to be evaluated. I'm not quite sure yet. There's definitely obviously risk with it, and people are unfortunately being seriously injured, in some cases worse. But I also look at, was understandable. So I'm trying to, I suppose.
Oh dear.
I don't want to sound like a politician, so I'm sorry for that.
Thank you anyway. No. Well, Andy, thank you very much. You've been very honest with us and answered some difficult questions. So we're really grateful to hear of your experience and the suggestions that you've had for things that will bring about a better situation on our roads. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for having me, Pauline. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks.
Sorry?
Just saying thank you very much for your time. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So the next thing on the agenda is the report from